Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We're continuing our study of the parables in Matthew's Gospel. And I love the way in Matthew's Gospel, in the Kingdom Sermon, in Matthew chapter 18, the parables that Jesus tells change. So he's been giving object lessons, sometimes detailed object lessons, like the parable of the sower. But now he's telling stories with people who have feelings and who find themselves in predicaments and who react and who act well or they don't act well. And he starts telling stories. And he had one of the longer parables that Jesus tells, not the longest and not the longest even in Matthew, but one of the longest, the parable of the unforgiving servant. Jesus is really now accessing the teaching tool that Nathan used in 2 Samuel chapter 12 with David when he had to convict David of his sin. And that's what Jesus is going to be doing from now on. He's going to be pushing our buttons. He's going to be reaching into our subconscious mind, into our limbic brains. He's going to be pushing our buttons so that he can transform our deepest motivations by telling us these stories. He can't he can't do this academically. He has to do it by telling us stories that that change the way we reason because it accesses our deepest impulses and our deepest emotions. And that's what he did. That's what he did with the parable of the unrighteous steward. And that's what he's going to continue to do. So we're in Matthew chapter 20 today. There are four standalone parables that Jesus tells apart from a sermon before we get to the eschatological sermon. We're going to have some really long parables there to tell. But now we're in Matthew 20 and we're in verses 1 through 16. And this is the parable of the workers in the vineyard. And it certainly taps into our impulse, our sensibilities about justice and about getting paid what you're due and about not getting a free ride or freeloading. So let's read Matthew chapter 20 verses 1 through 16. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius for the day, which is standard wage, a denarius for the day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he went about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to those he said, You go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you. And so they went. And again he went about the sixth hour and the ninth hour, and did the same thing. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing, and he said to them, Why have you been standing here idle all day long? And they said to him, Because no one has hired us. And he said to them, You too go into the vineyard. When evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, Call the laborers and pay them for their wages, beginning with the last group to the first. When those hired about the 11th hour came, each one received a denarius. When those hired first came, they thought they would receive even more. They also received each one a denarius. And when they received it, they grumbled at the landowners, saying, These last men have worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the scorching heat of the day. And he answered them and said to them, Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. If I wish to give this last man the same as you, is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what is my own? Or is your eye envious because I am generous? Thus the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. Now, Jesus uses this phrase, the last first and the first last, in a variety of ways. Preachers do just that. I think this parable is specific to the Jews because I just cannot help but think that um, the Jews who had been faithful for generation after generation, who had been in Egyptian enslavement, who had been in Babylonian captivity, who had suffered the occupation of the Romans, who had sacrificed um, to stay faithful to the Word of God. and suffered at the hands of Gentiles. And then immediately welcoming Gentiles in as equal children in God's family. I'm sure that that was hard for them to do in those first few generations. Why? The relationship that they had with God should be an advantage. And it is, because you have a close relationship with God. But it doesn't mean things are easier here on earth. They were God's instrument to save all the world. But that doesn't make them better once salvation is offered. So I think it directly goes to the Jews. It's a simple story, um, but it's not just for the Jews, because it reminds us that in God's kingdom, God's mathematics is not 2 plus 2 equals 4. Grace defies a human sense of justice. Um, and I think it teaches a very similar lesson to the prodigal son, because there's no way that the older brother, is wrong when he does the math. Anything you do to help this worthless brother of mine, you're doing at my expense. In human reckoning, that's true, but not in kingdom reckoning. There's a different mathematics involved when grace enters a system. Grace changes the mathematics that we use. It just absolutely does. And all Christians have to understand that. And so anyway, I think this simple story that really we so understand the guys who have worked all day, 12-hour work day, harvest time probably because you have 12 hours of sunlight. They worked all day. They get the same pay as the guys that worked 1 hour. You and I would be infuriated as well. And when God using his divine reasoning, he's absolutely right. And who are we to question him? Anyway, that's it's such a wonderful parable. And the thing about these parables too, and I know I'm taking up a little more of your time than I am owed today, um, is that the more we think about them, the more we come back to them, the deeper their meanings become, and the more expansive their claims upon us. That's what a good story does, and that's why Jesus has transition from telling object lessons, which also continue to instruct, to telling stories, which are so rich with meaning and which literally sink into the very roots of our thought processes, of our feelings, of our wills, and change them at a molecular level, really. And anyway, so the next time that we're together, we're going to look at a short parable, which is also a short story, Parable of the Two Sons, chapter 21. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.